On the internet lately, many socialists and communists who are not anarchists, like non-anarchist socialists, mainly from the Stalinists and to a lesser extent Maoists, are reacting to the new JFK declassified files. Even though it is still redacted, we talk about around 60,000 pages. But many of them, for some reason, given the current political climate that we are going on right now, are engaging in conspiracy theory mainly from two things. But I'm going to focus on one thing that is related to anarchism. And one of them is Israel was somehow involved in the JFK assassination because he stands against the nuclear program. Even though there's no evidence to support that, and all studies show that all experts who analyze these documents have concluded that these new declassified documents has revealed nothing new and still maintain that Lee Harvey Oswald was the lone gunner. There's no conspiracy. The CIA was not involved with the assassination. The KGB was not involved with the assassination. Israel was not involved with the assassination. The only actual conspiracy cover that turned out to be true is the CIA cover up why they failed to protect the president because they knew the danger ahead of time, and because of their incompetence, they cover it up because it looks bad. That's it. They were bad at their job. They were very incompetent, and they want to cover that up because it will feel so ashamed and embarrassed that a U.S. Marine soldier, veteran Lee Harvey Oswald, let's not forget that he is a U.S. Marine, assassinate a president, and their incompetence. Even though they know ahead of time that the president was in danger by this man, they did nothing about it. And now they feel embarrassed and ashamed that knowing full well something bad is gonna happen. And they didn't do anything because of their stupidity and incompetence. Now, that's one thing. The second thing I want to focus on is many people, Stalinists and Maoists, claim that the Hungary Revolution of 1956 was a CIA-backed revolt controlled by fascists and Nazis. This is not true. This was an anarchist revolution and the only time in history where anarchists overthrew a Marxist state. And it was an anarchist society that lasted for 2 months under the people's control of the interesting. In fact, the documented evidence has proven that this is the case. Because declassified documents indicate that the CIA had minimal direct involvement in the uprising. That the 1958 document by the CIA Clandestine Service History noted that the agency was caught off guard by the events, stating, and I quote, "We had no inside information, little outside information, and could not read the Russians' mind." That's it. They were not involved. It was primarily an indigenous movement by the native population of Hungary. It was not orchestrated by the CIA at all. In fact, we have enough documentation, primary sources, in fact, that it was an anarchist revolution. And even, let's give them the argument that the Hungary 1956 revolution was a CIA-backed coup, right? A CIA revolt. Let's say that is. Let's give it the benefit of the doubt that this is the case, even though even the declassified document, even the CIA's own admission, were not involved, they were even off guard by it. But let's say for the sake of the argument it is. They still failed because the CIA are in principle anti-communist. So whatever what they want to make a pro-capitalist philosophy. Instead, the people went for an anarchist philosophy. They were using workers' council, democratization of the workforce, establishing communes, right? And they want to do workers' democracy. That's the complete opposite of what the capitalist society wants. In fact, it's a good example analyzed by the Andy Anderson, one of the primary documents about the revolution. It can be seen by Russian ruthless policy toward her satellite regimes. Soviet imperialism was inclined to defend on what she already had and the creation of a buffer zone between herself and the West. This is not to deny that the ruling elite of the Soviet Union did not try to exploit the countries under its influence. For example, in the years after the end of the Second World War, the Eastern Bloc countries paid the USSR millions of dollars in reparation, as in private capitalism. The satellite states were regarded as a source of raw materials and cheap manufacturing goods. Russia secured the satellite exports at below world price and exported to them at above world price. Thus, trade was based on an old imperialist principle of buying cheap and selling dear, very, very dear. However, the nature of the imperialist regime was such a discourage to much expansionism as Russian imperialism had to rely on armies occupation, only subservient quasi governments, or highly organized and loyal political policies, or all three. In some searches that considered the notion of Russian power occurred with each acquisition of territory. Este, In fact, the revolt and revolution which we refer of under Stalinism almost always raised genuine socialist demand. For example, like again in Hungary, was a social revolution in the fullest sense of the term. Its object was a fundamental change in the relations of production and the relations between ruler and ruled in factories, pits, and on the land. Given this, unsurprisingly, Western political commentary was centered upon the nationalistic aspect of the revolution, no matter how trivial. This was unsurprising if the West was opposed to its method and to its aim. While capitalist government could generally support people demanding workers' management of industry and already beginning to implement this on an increasing scale, the revolution showed every sign of making both them and their bureaucratic counterparts in the East redundant. The revolt itself was rooted in the new organs of struggle, Workers' Council, which embodied in embryo the new society they were seeking to achieve. The Hungary Revolution of 1956 was a spontaneous nationwide revolt against the government of the Hungarian People's Republic and its Soviet-imposed policies in state capitalism, lasting from October 23rd until November 10, 1956. It was the first major threat to Soviet control since the USSR forced to drive out the Nazis at the end of World War II and occupy Eastern Europe. Despite the failure of the uprising, it was highly influential and came to play a role in the downfall of the Soviet Union decades later. The revolt began as a student demonstration, which attracted thousands as they marched through central Budapest to the Parliament building, calling out on the street using a van with loudspeakers via Radio Free Europe. A student delegation entered radio building trying to protest the students' demand was detained. When the delegation release was demanded by the demonstration outside, they were fired upon by the State Security Police, or the ABH, from within the building. Then, when the students were fired on a student, died and was wrapped in a flag and held above the crowd. This was the start of a revolution. As the news spread, disorder and violence erupted throughout the capital. The revolt spread quickly across Hungary and the government collapsed. Thousands organized into militias, battling the AVH and Soviet troops. Pro-Soviet communists and the AVH members were often executed or imprisoned, and former prisoners were released and armed. Radical and proper workers' council wrestled in municipal control from the ruling Hungarian Workers' People's Party and demanded political change. A new government fully disbanded the AVH, declared its intention to withdraw from the Warsaw Pact, and pledged to reestablish free elections. By the end of the October, fighting had almost stopped in the sense of normality began to return. After the announcing a willingness to negotiate a withdrawal of Soviet forces, the Politburo changed its mind and moved to crush the revolution. On November 4, a large Soviet force invaded Budapest and other regions of the country. The Hungarian resistance continued until November 10. Over 2,500 Hungarians and 700 Soviet troops were killed in the conflict, and 200,000 Hungarians fled as refugees. Mass arrests and denunciations continued for months thereafter. By January 1957, the new Soviet-installed government had suppressed all political public opposition. These Soviet actions will strengthen control over Eastern Europe, aligned with many Western Marxists. As Conan Ward has noted, and I quote, the economist Peter Wells, who was in Ponza at the time of the bread riots, who went to Hungary in the period when the Austrian frontier was open, noted what he called an astonishing morality purity, and he explained, Poland has less chance to show this than Hungary, where for weeks there was no authority. In the frenzy of anarchist self-discipline, the people, including the criminals, stole nothing, beat no Jews, and never got drunk. They went so far as to lynch only security policemen of the ABH, leaving other communists untouched. The moral achievement is perhaps unparalleled in revolutionary history. It was indeed intellectuals of some sort that began both movements, with the industrial workers following them. The peasants had of course never ceased to resist since 1945, but for the nature of things, in a diverse and passive manner, peasants stop things, they don't start them. They saw initiative was too astonishing. A deeply moving dispatch of free food to Budapest after the first Soviet attack had been defeated. And remember, they tried to invade twice. The first time they failed, only the second time they succeed with the combined help of counter-revolutionary Marxist traders. A Hungarian witness of the same events declared, and I quote, "May I tell you one thing about this common sense of the street? During these first days of the revolution, just for example, many hours standing in quick waits for bread and even under such circumstances, not a single fight. One day we were standing in quick wait, and then a truck came with two young boys with machine guns, and they were asking us to give them any money we could spare to buy bread for the fighters. All the gateway was collected half a truck full of bread. It is just an example. Afterwards, somebody beside me asked us to hold his place for him because he gave all his money. He had to go home to get some. In this case, the whole gateway gave him all the money he wanted. For example, naturally, all the shop windows broke in the first day, but not a single thing inside was touched by anybody. You could have seen broken in shop windows, a candy store, even the little children didn't touch anything in it. Not even the camera shops, opticians, or jewelers. Not a single day was touched for 2 or 3 days, and in the streets of the third or the fourth day, shops' windows were empty, but it was written there that the caretaker has taken it anyway, or everything from here it is in this or that field. And these first days, it was a custom to put big boxes on street corners or on crossing where more streets met, just a script over them. This is for the wounded and for the casualties, or for the families of the dead. They were set out in the morning, and by noon they were full of money. And many examples throughout this that they have happened throughout they for example they destroy a Soviet Su-85 in Budapest, which is a tank. And we see examples of worker self-management using anarchist principles, worker self-manager, workers council establishing communes for 2 months. It was controlled by the people. It was an anarchist revolution, and it was an anarchist society throughout those 12 months. These Marxists nowadays who claim this was a CIA backed coup, they're fooled by conspiracy theory and propaganda. Do not believe in their lies. There is a genuine revolution. It's just the problem that the Soviet sample was a right wing perversion of Marxism.